We think about Harry Potter and Harry getting whisked away to the school, which has been designed for the things that he's good at. And I think about children with ADHD as well. I mean, they are being failed constantly by an education system which is built around other types of brain and, other ways of learning. And it's such a shame because the skills and talents that are inherent within people with ADHD are really, really amazing. And if we can harness that, we'd all live in a much better place.
Hello, I'm Sam, and welcome to Working to Work, a project exploring the intersection of neurodivergence and employment. For this episode, I spoke with Nanette Mellor, a disability and neurodiversity specialist, most recently working as CEO of Drake Music, about their work championing neurodivergent strengths. So Nanette was CEO of the Brain Charity, which was one of the first organisations in the UK to deliver training on neurodiversity, and they focused on employment and maximising the strengths and skills of neurodivergent people. Most recently, Nanette was CEO of Drake Music, which is a charitable organisation that supports deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people to become professional musicians. At the moment, Nanette is working in education to support disabled and neurodivergent children and adults, with a particular interest in how accommodating different learning styles can offer better outcomes. So I first became aware of Nanette through reading a fantastic interview she gave last year to Eric Pines of Authority magazine. In the interview titled Neurodiversity in the Workforce, Nanette brilliantly laid out the benefits of having a neurodiverse workforce and crucially how to make workplaces more neuroinclusive. One of the things I really loved about this interview were the practical examples for how the ideas can be realised and their results. So the examples aren't just theoretical, but are drawn from the real world implementation and the beneficial outcomes they had at the Brain Charity and Drake Music where Nanette worked. So I'd highly recommend anyone interested in practically how to implement neuroinclusive practices into a workplace, read this interview, and I'll link it in the show notes. But given how that subject matter was covered so well, and that unfortunately part of our interview wasn't recorded, I've focused this episode on Nanette's work championing neurodivergent strengths and their impact on past, present, and future work. So in this episode, amongst other things, we speak about how neurodivergent differences might be better understood and catered to in education. We touched on what diagnosis might look like in the future, and also whether some skills historically considered essential, but that are innately challenging to many dyslexic people and perhaps other neurodivergent people, and I'm sure as percentages of the neuromajority, such as maths and spelling, are as crucial in the 21st century as we perhaps thought they were in the past. And actually, much of our conversation focuses on the future. So we also touched on the impact of AI for neurodivergent people in the workplace and how creative thinking and problem solving are becoming more valued as computers increasingly work on the more linear tasks. We also touched on Nanette's own journey through employment and the challenges and strengths of being dyslexic. Nanette spoke to what strengths have helped her to be an effective leader and was open about how at times challenging convention can lead to resistance even in leadership positions. So all in all, it was a great chat and one that I hope you too will take something from. A polite request, if you do find this video, podcast, broadcast valuable, please do share it with others, like, subscribe, review, and all that good stuff, because it increases the project's reach and ultimately its impact. All right, enough talk. Here's my conversation with Nanette Mellor. Enjoy. Nanette, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me. I think you've got some really interesting thoughts about neurodiversity in the workplace, not just thoughts, but practical ways that you have sought to make workplaces more inclusive for others and also recognized your own strengths and kind of maximize those to get into positions where you can do that. So that's really inspiring to me and impressive. I wonder if you can, in your own words, introduce yourself and speak to the work you've done and kind of what's been the driving force behind
the decisions you've made in terms of what you want to do or what you've done.
Thanks, Sam. I guess if I'm going to describe myself, I would say that I am a disability and neurodiversity specialist and a third sector leader. I've worked for disabled people, neurodivergent people, my entire career. And I have most recently started to work in CEO positions. So one of the more kind of substantial roles that I had was CEO of the Brain Charity. I was there for 9 years. And during that period, we really began to see the beginnings of the neurodiversity movement, I guess, and the kind of acknowledgement that these different ways of being, these kind of different brain types that we have, which had traditionally been considered disabilities, were actually just natural variations. And that was really lovely. And we decided to become one of the first organisations in the UK to start to deliver training and information on that. And we had a particular focus on employment, on supporting some really big global organisations actually in how they can employ a diverse workforce and how they can really maximise on the skills and talents that are inherent with neurodivergent people. I've worked as CEO for Drake Music too, which is an organisation that focuses on supporting deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people to become professional musicians, and lots of work there on development of particular types of instrumentation, on learning, and on kind of ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to engage in music, which unfortunately sometimes they don't. So that was a really wonderful exploration into the arts and what the barriers are there, and also kind of exploring the musical gifts that a lot of neurodivergent people have. And at the moment I'm working in education, looking at the classroom, supporting neurodivergent children and young adults. And I suppose on a personal level, I'm exploring the connection between different learning styles, which, you know, if you're a teacher or a trainer, you've been taught about for many, many years, the connections between those different learning styles and different types of individuals. So autistic people, people with ADHD, people with dyslexia, and starting to see if those learning styles that we're also aware of, if there is a pattern amongst children who are neurodivergent. So that's a really fascinating area for me at the moment.
Just a quick thought. In terms of the work that you're doing now in education, do you conceive that there might be a potential future where what collectively we recognise, okay, autistic people, people with ADHD, dyslexic people, there's variations within that in terms of learning style, but tend to learn in a certain way that is different from, say, the neuromajority, and we have types of schools or that maybe serve that type of learning better?
It's a really interesting question, and I was very recently asked to attend a conference down in Cambridge, which was about inclusive education. And I have to say, it was, we were halfway through the conference and there was some amazingly experienced academics there, and some really wonderful user-led organisations. But I really did feel at one point that I was the only person in the room that was suggesting, you know, maybe if we want to be inclusive for neurodivergent individuals, we need to start to think about having segregated learning. And of course, when you use that word segregated, it puts a really different slant on it. The whole focus of the conference was about inclusion. and about making sure that neurodivergent children are fully involved in what's going on in the classroom. But looking at it from a really practical perspective, which is what I think I bring, how can you include a child that struggles with sensory overload in a classroom with a group of children that don't? Do you tone everything down? Do you quiet everything down? And if you're going to do that, then what about the child that's in the classroom that actually needs extra sensory input to enable them to learn? And so the idea for me that you have a classroom with a teacher in an already resource-strapped environment, to me, that can just support everybody, it seemed impractical. And actually, I would have loved somebody to have found me as a child. I would have loved them to have pulled me out and have been told, actually, Nanette, yeah, you're not very good at spelling. You can't do those things, but that's because your brain's working differently. And you can do this sort of stuff instead. And that's quite an unusual talent. And actually, that's going to be the thing that makes you. And we're going to train you up to be a really great leader. We're going to teach you how to do what you're good at. Instead of trying to squash me into an environment that wasn't built for me, I think that kind of education is absolutely what we should be looking at. We should be looking at different types of learning, different types of brain, and building environments around them. And the other thing to say is that IQ, which is fundamentally flawed anyway, but that way of measuring somebody's success, measuring their abilities, that varies within groups of people. So you can have autism and have a learning disability. You can have autism and have an extremely high IQ. You can have dyslexia and have a low IQ, and you can have dyslexia and have a very, very high IQ. And so I think you would need to take that into account as well. But yeah, absolutely. My answer is yes. My opinion is that once we explore more about the brain, once we understand the fundamentals a little bit better, we probably will start to do that. I hope so anyway, because I would have loved that. And we think about Harry Potter and, and Harry getting whisked away to the school, which has been designed for the things that he's good at. And I think about children with ADHD as well. I mean, they are being failed constantly by an education system which is built around other types of brain and, other ways of learning. And it's such a shame, because the skills and talents that are inherent within people with ADHD are really, really amazing. And if we can harness that, we'd all live in a much better place.
Yes, I totally agree. And if you don't mind, I want to just share my own experience. Maybe it's slightly similar to yours. I wasn't particularly good at exams. I think exams are kind of a lot of times testing working memory, which isn't particularly good, or the environment is not conducive to me being able to demonstrate really what I know. So I drop down in groups, and you kind of then with maybe people that are disruptive, maybe I'm disruptive as well, so you're just putting lots of people that are challenged or having challenges, but the actual type of teaching didn't change. It was kind of then you're just putting the people that maybe need something else or a different type of teaching all together, but with the same teaching, and it then becomes kind of more, at least in my school experience, about discipline, or you kind of sort of give up to people in those classes and feel that the school isn't there to support you, as opposed to a group that people recognize, okay, these people need maybe different type of support than those in the kind of what were in my school seen as like the elite classes. I don't love this idea of the 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm in 4, and you have a sense that you're not good enough. Maybe we don't categorize them in that hierarchical sense, but rather like this is the group that needs, for this subject, this type of support, and this is the group that learns best this way. And I think then you could potentially see both groups thrive and not feel a sense of inferiority, or that they're kind of forgotten effectively.
Yeah, I mean that remembering thing you were talking about with the exams, thinking that through, and I always, we always talk about the 3 R's in education, but to me the 3 R's are read, remember, and regurgitate, because that's what exams are all about. You've got to read stuff, you've got to remember it, and then you've got to replicate it on. You've got to chuck it out again onto an exam paper. And I, thinking again, big picture thinking, which is what I love to do. Thinking about the internet now and how we've got all of the facts and figures there at our fingertips. So what is the point in remembering all of this? We don't need to remember anymore. We don't need to remember those facts and figures. So having an education system which is based on pumping facts and figures into people's brains is a complete waste of time, because they don't need to retain that information anymore. And actually, I think what we'll see is a real focus on creativity, because that's something that technology hasn't really got. Yes, it can spit out, AI-generated music and imagery and so on, but that's not really, as human beings, what we want. Being creative will be the trait, in my opinion, that will be sought after in the future. And so this whole education system we've got at the moment is based really on skills that we don't need anymore. But I could go on about that for ages as well. I think we've got a lot to learn, but we're getting there. Things are changing, which is great.
I'm totally with you. I don't fear the kind of ascent of AI. I think that AI can't do necessarily things that maybe my mind or your mind can do as well. And I think AI is pulling from human experience, pulling from the internet, pulling from our collective experience, which is predominantly made up of kind of neuromajority minds. When I go to ChatGPT, I'm asking it to support me in skills that I don't have as don't come as fluidly and naturally as to me, that maybe does come easier to other people. But I don't think I could go to it and ask it to do the things that do come organically and more naturally to me. I don't think it could achieve that task.
No, and really, when I've been talking to a lot of musicians recently, there is a real fear within that community that their roles will become obsolete because AI will produce music going forward. And it's really interesting because I studied art history at one point in my education, and there was real change, of course, when photography was developed, and there was real crisis within the visual arts community that they weren't going to have a role anymore because there's this thing called photography now. But actually, music, art, everything is about how we connect with each other. We're interested in other people so much. Our art is a form of communication. Our music is a form of communication. Dance, sport, all of those things, they're really tribal. And if you've got a piece of music that's generated by a computer, even if it sounds exactly the same as one that's produced by a human being, you're going to want to listen to the one that's produced by the human being because you're interested in humans and you want to know what that person wants to say to you. So I don't think we've got anything to fear in that respect. I think, our creativity is something that will never be able to be replaced because company and people, they're the things we like in life, and they're the things we'll always crave and we'll always seek out.
Yes, agreed. One of the things that I've appreciated so much about the interview is that you give practical examples and constructive, here's and how this can be done and how this might happen, as opposed to this is a problem, but I don't have any solutions. And I really admire that about you. And I also think that that's something that neurodivergent people are very good at, actually, like problem solving and here's what we can do as opposed to this just isn't working. I'm just curious, I'm not necessarily asking for you to tell me what the solution will be, but how do you envision education changing in kind of the ways that you mentioned? Because is it about money or is it about convincing kind of authorities and greater society that this is a better way to kind of support all people in their strengths? And I ask this question in part because education and our experience at school and obviously in childhood before that is so fundamental, I think, to employment. And do we have the confidence coming out of school, going into the work world what we can do and what we're capable of and what our strengths are, and having them being validated through our childhood and then school. I think if you have that and you get out at the end, you have a bit of a leg up, as opposed to people that maybe haven't had those strengths validated and had more of their challenges highlighted.
I think money is a massive factor. I think short term, things are moving along pretty well in that, the world has woken up to neurodiversity. Connections are being made. There are now neurodivergent wings within prisons, because the prison population is really, people with neurodivergent are really overrepresented within prison. The reason I mention prison is because an awful lot of children with ADHD are expelled from school. A lot of those children then go on to commit crime because there isn't anything else around. They've low self-esteem, often living in very challenging places and can't fit in, And I remember talking to a really amazing specialist in ADHD who I said, why do children with ADHD end up in prison? And he said, well, if you're a young man and you're in the classroom and you're being told over and over again to sit down and be quiet, and you can't do it, you just can't. You might try really, really hard, but you can't do that. You've got two choices. You either publicly state in front of all of your peers that you are not able to do this thing, or you say, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. And you decide, you're probably pretty angry at this point anyway, because you're being forced to do something that's impossible for you. You kind of rebel. You go, right, that's it. I choose not to take part in this. I think we're starting to understand that now. These things do take money, though. They take, to kind of link up the knowledge that specialist, that academic has, the research they've done with what's happening in a classroom over here in Birkenhead is really, really difficult. It's going to take a long time, but it's happening. I think in terms of children with ADHD, for instance, it makes absolute sense to take the money out of the prison system that's being pumped in at the moment and put it into education. Of course it does. But education, health, criminal justice, they are all massive political footballs and they get tossed around. And, 1 minute we'll have a prime minister that's telling us that, our criminal justice system really needs reforming. It's not working. But then we might have somebody a week later who's saying, we need to be tough on crime. So it's very political. But I think actually one of the amazing things the internet is doing is it's connecting all of our knowledge up, isn't it? And you can look at other countries and what they're doing and learn from them. They can learn from us what we're doing. So I do think there'll be a rapid development of what we know about neurodiversity, what we can see in education and criminal justice and health and so on. Again, a very long answer, Sam, but it's not an easy thing to solve.
100%. I wonder, what you think. Again, I'm sort of diverging from our questions, but I wonder what you think the role of diagnosis is in this. So if the hypothetical child with ADHD in school is in that situation, feels unable to sit down, or doesn't want to sit down, or that doesn't work for them, and instead of feeling the confidence or ability to say this doesn't work for me, they act up. Perhaps with a diagnosis, there's an accommodation there. There's a kind of understanding. I wonder, but that's not accessible to everyone, and I think without that, people kind of are less. They then just attribute it to bad behavior as opposed to a different needs and kind of ways of being. My sense is that necessarily diagnosis for everyone isn't the solution. There isn't necessarily resources, and it doesn't necessarily align, I think, with the greater vision of neurodiversity, of not needing to necessarily label someone as different. And in a short-term sense, it works. Maybe in a longer progressive future, it doesn't lean into where we're all different and we have different needs, and seeing those behaviors as just a kind of manifestation of different needs. I wonder, in terms of being able to be teachers being able to be sympathetic, or kind of you could transpose this into employment as well. Employers recognizing behavior as a difference and a response to kind of different needs and challenges, without the need to necessarily have a kind of formal diagnosis or even the awareness of that kind of condition, which a lot of the times is a collection of characteristics with a title on it. Convoluted question, I know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The term diagnosis doesn't really fit in with the movement, and because there's a comparison, between the results of the neurodivergent child and the neurotypical individual. So it's all about comparing us with the masses, I suppose, and that doesn't quite feel right. I think that in the future, it may well be the case that everybody is screened, and in one way or another, and then we will be able to provide the right kind of support for children and for adults in the workplace. I know there is a bill that is going through Parliament at the moment, which is about screening children for neurodiversity. I think it's a really brilliant start. Again, no doubt the screening tools used will be about, comparing how well the child can cope with, what is broadly a neurotypical focused system. But hopefully once they start to do that, they'll start to see the kind of numbers we're talking about, because actually the only children that are being picked up at the moment are the ones that are not able to mask, and the ones that have, that are very, very different. And I think that, people like me slip through the net very easily. I wasn't picked up till I was at university, and that's because I knew I was failing in these areas, and I did my damnedest to cover it all up. I spent my first student loan on a computer, which at the time was unheard of for anyone to have their own computer. It cost me £2,000, which was the entirety of my grant for the year. But I knew this thing had a spell checker on it, so that's what my money was going on, because I knew I wasn't going to get through otherwise. And I think there are lots and lots of people like me. And I know that there are, tons of girls with autism that just aren't picked up. So I think the screening tools will help pick up on individuals that haven't been diagnosed, that don't know, and that will help. But only if that information is then used, not to try to force people like me into, the basic kind of standard education system. But hopefully the numbers will show them that it is worthwhile changing things and worthwhile developing different types of learning environments for people. That's what I'm hoping will happen. It has happened quite rapidly, this kind of, I would say within the last 5 years, the kind of neurodiversity word being on the lips of all the EDI specialists, through to this bill that's being presented to Parliament about screening. I think that's brilliant. So hopefully another 5 years, and we'll see money being pumped into the education system to provide different types of learning to different young people.
Do you think there's something in maybe educating educators on neurodivergent traits and behaviours as well, so they can identify as well, okay, this person is struggling to sit down, or this isn't working, and them being able to conceptualize that behaviour as not something they're doing wrong, but a difference that maybe needs accommodating even without a kind of screening or a diagnosis?
I think it will probably be the teachers that will be doing the screening. I think it may well be part of their teacher training, and maybe that that they will, or it will be part of the curriculum that they are screened on an ongoing basis. I would love to say yes to that, Sam, but the truth is that the last parents' evening we had with my son, he did brilliant on everything, but his handwriting wasn't very good. And I said to the teacher, well, do you think, are there any tips, tricks that you have to support left-handed children to have better handwriting. And then you could see the penny dropping in the teacher's head, who just remembered that Sam is left-handed and that's why his handwriting isn't very good. And she actually said, no, actually, we don't have any, we don't do anything different for children who are left-handed when it comes to handwriting. And so even as something as simple as that, and it's 1 in 10 children that are left-handed, even something as simple as that, and I consider left-handedness a kind of neurodivergence as well, that isn't catered for. You know, you just kind of you've got to be shoved in to the box. So I would love to say yes, that is going to happen, Sam. But we're not even helping left-handed children, you know, with a handwriting at the moment. Not in Sam's school anyway, which is very good, by the way, apart from that.
Just curious, given your expertise, do you have a sense of what would help in that you can then offer the teacher, well, maybe if you do this, or are you reluctant to kind of tell the teacher what to do?
I was reluctant to tell the teacher. You know, when I was growing up, it was, because I'm left-handed as well, it was much easier for me to write from the middle page outwards. And I would write back to front. So if you held a mirror up to it, it would read perfectly. Because my brain's flipped over, you know, it's the other way around. And so just physically having to do that and holding the pen is hard. So just teaching him how to hold the pen differently. You know, what the teacher will be doing at the moment, should be standing in front of the class telling the children to hold the pen in this particular way. And for Sam, that's not going to work. It's going to be very difficult for him. So yeah, there's some really basic things the teachers can do, but Sam is always going to find it more difficult. But part of me is like, well, you know, how much handwriting are people going to be doing anyway in the future? Are we going to be doing any writing at all? Because now we've got this form of communication, video. Maybe writing is just going to become some weird art form that people do, you know, because really, maybe we don't need it anymore. I don't know. It's a bit controversial, that one.
Well, we don't really have those conversations, or at least I'm not party to them, like in society, right? Do we still need this skill? Are some of the skills that are taught like as essential as they used to be, potentially? Like, are they aligned with what we're going to need in the future? But you would know better than me whether those conversations are happening, I guess, at kind of higher levels.
I think the idea that writing isn't needed anymore, oh my God, I can just see Parliament kind of falling about laughing. I mean, when you look at our institutions, they're all based on those skills, the 3 R's. Parliament is just so steeped in paper. It's unbelievable. So yeah, I think we've got a long way to go, really.
I was just going to say I wasn't particularly good at maths because I don't think my brain works really for maths, and I don't know, but I also haven't felt like I have needed it a huge amount, and I can use a calculator if I have, and that's kind of going the other way. I know like the current Prime Minister is really big on pushing maths more, which seems a strange time to be doing that when, from my perception, it's not everyone's strength, and just pushing it onto them doesn't help them get better at it necessarily. And I think, is it something that we're really going to need hugely in the future for everyone to be super adept at?
Yeah, I mean, it's an archaic view, really. One of my old friends is a physicist, and I remember saying to him, "Can you add this up for me? I can't be bothered to do it. My brain's half asleep." And he said, "I can't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I only work in symbols now." And in that field, what is celebrated, what is rewarded, is creativity again. It's not about, the kind of hard maths that we learn. It's about understanding the bigger picture and coming up with solutions to industry's problems. That is, again, it is about creativity. And we have to start to teach people that and really, really celebrate it. And when we find an individual who is creative, who is naturally creative, I think economically it makes sense to pump a lot of resources into that individual, because they will be coming up with the solutions of the future. That's the golden egg for me, is creativity in terms of what we all need for society. Those are the brains. we need to be focusing on now. Yes, in history, maybe, we didn't have the calculators, we didn't have the spell checkers, we didn't have AI. We would have needed people that can remember facts, that can add numbers up. But we don't need that anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I have a programming friend that I used to work at a tech company, and I had a very good friend as a programmer and engineer. And I was saying to her, I don't think I could do this very well because I'm not particularly good at maths. And she told me, you don't really need to be particularly good at maths. The key strength is problem solving and being able to see patterns and figuring out, like, you need to learn the code, which is like basically learning a language of sorts. And if you have a deep interest in it, I think, and you're passionate about it, one will learn it and have the capability to do it. But it's not necessarily about being kind of a maths genius. And I thought that was a really interesting point. It sounds similar to what you're saying with the physicist, that isn't the key strength. Maths, especially as you can ask a computer to do the maths part, you kind of need the mind, your own human mind, I think, at times to kind of solve the problem. And then the maths can be helped by an aid or someone whose strength is that, a human whose strength is the maths part.
I mean, Alan Turing, when we look at his work and what it achieved, his brain was absolutely incredible. He was able to do, all of that coding and all of that, deciphering of information. But the thing that helped us as society the most was his creativity. He was an incredibly creative person, and he saw patterns that other people didn't see. He made connections that other people didn't see. That's where his real strength was.
Yeah, and that maybe there's some work in terms of how, as a society, we conceptualize creativity. I think maybe a lot would think of creativity as painting, as art, as music, as dance, which it totally is. But there's creative thinking that is like problem solving, is non-linear thinking, is systems thinking, and those are creative ways of thinking about problems that, is often why neurodivergent people get called weird, potentially, because they're thinking in a different way. There's making creative links there that, when applied to problem solving, are incredibly useful, because you're not necessarily just looking in a straight line at a problem.
And just on the education side, there are certain countries that will totally disable any kind of creative thinking. And they will do that on purpose. They will not ban it, but there won't be any kind of creative aspects to the education system at all. It will be about this kind of funnel learning. We're going to pump you full of facts and figures. There are lots of education systems around the country that just do that, and do it for political reasons, I would say, to make sure that their subjects do what they're told, stay in line, don't come up with ideas about how things can move on. And there are other education systems that are starting to really focus on that. So we can change it. But you're right, it's the weird kid in the class, the one that doesn't fit in. They're the one that's going to be thinking differently. They're the one you need to have a good look at, because there's something special going on there, something really useful. I am seeing green shoots, though, and I don't know whether... I don't think it's a Tory Labour thing at the moment. I think this is a human evolution thing. If Stephen Fry's done some really interesting talks or lectures on what he sees as, our economic future, and he talks about the creative industry being, one of the things that really will lead the way, because that's what we're interested in. We're interested in each other. We're interested in communicating with each other, in being with each other. And our arts are our culture, and our culture is what brings us together. Whether that's just kind of sitting at home watching the TV, connecting with the characters, or whether that's being at a massive football match or a big gig, that's where the future lies.
Which makes total sense if we can kind of automate a lot of stuff, and it's mechanized, or there's AI. I always think that the kind of like the removing of those kind of legacy industry doesn't necessarily need to mean that those that worked in it suffer. Potentially there's new things that maybe they would enjoy doing more, or people have more time potentially to engage with the things that they are interested in. It's only really when you pull the plug on one thing but don't offer any kind of solution of like, but this is this is a better future, a vision for what's better.
I mean, that word vision, back to neurodiversity, I think that is a key word for somebody like me with dyslexia, that vision or imagination. You can call it that. It is the ability to think about what comes next and to imagine what comes next and to be able to translate that idea, that vision, that image in your head into the real world. You're absolutely right. There's lots of scaremongering that goes on about technology. I think there is a gap though at the moment. There's nobody sort of saying, actually, this is what it could look like. Think about a world where nobody's got a boring job. Think about a world where nobody's got a really physically demanding job. All the robots are going to take care of that. All the computers are going to do all the boring number crunching. There's going to be machines flipping burgers. No one's going to have to do that sort of boring rubbish anymore. We get to do the good stuff, we get to do all the creative work. I think if somebody would come up with a really good vision of that, it'll probably all be a lot comfier and, a lot more optimistic. It's just a bit of an unknown at the moment, though, isn't it? And that's just makes people feel frightened. If we don't know what's coming next, people get nervous.
Yeah, which brings me on to back to you, and thank you for bringing us back to neurodiversity, because you have got yourself into positions where you're able to speak about that vision and hopefully enact it. And I think that's really important, that there's people that do have that vision and different way of thinking in positions to affect change. And you mentioned in the interview with Eric that you're dyslexic, and I was curious how you felt that has impacted your career path, and whether there's any examples that you can share of where being dyslexic has been a benefit in a kind of quite tangible sense to kind of gaining opportunities or solving problems.
There is a massive upside to being dyslexic. My brain works differently. My brain works in a way that makes me a good leader. And that's not a byproduct of my dyslexia. Actually, my genes persist, my dyslexic genes persist, because we need leaders. Tribes need leaders. And that's why I'm able to do the role that I can do, because society needs people like this, with brains like this. And it's the same with people who have autism and ADHD. An individual with ADHD at the moment is labelled as being somebody who can't focus on one thing very well. And actually, when you look at the neurochemistry behind an ADHD brain with ADHD, it's essentially a brain which has a different chemical makeup that provides that individual with a thirst for knowledge in all sorts of things, massive interest in lots of things, and can really become focused on one or two of those things really, really, really profoundly. But they are the person in the tribe that is going to get bored fishing in the same pond. We go to the same pond every day, we find one fish, great. The person with ADHD is going to get bored of going to that same pond, and they're going to start looking at other ponds, and they will be the one that finds the pond with two fish in. They are the person, I think, in the tribe that will support us to evolve, push us forwards, help us develop, because they experiment in things, they're quite impulsive, they want to try new stuff, they want to take risks, and they're fascinated with everything. And without people who have ADHD in our society, we might not develop as well, as fast. We might not take risks that we need to take. People with autism, can have such high levels of concentration, can feel perfectly happy doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. They are, often fantastic researchers, because they will just keep going until they find the answer. And that kind of special interest, that obsession, that focus, if you really, really, if you look at any kind of campus in the country that is based on, science or tech, you're going to find massive numbers of autistic people in those communities because they are brilliant at that type of work. And without them, in a technical world, we're not going to get very far. So my dyslexia to me is only really a different type of brain. I've got a different type of brain. This is my role within the tribe. It's different than other people's. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You need different people in the tribals. Things don't work very well. That's all it's about. I know it's got this label, but it doesn't mean anything to me, that label, anymore.
Can I ask, like, when you're kind of leading a company, are you open about being dyslexic to those that you're working with?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no, and that's the honest answer.
I wonder if that can kind of demystify or kind of destigmatize in a way. If like the leader of the company is, that isn't me saying you should be doing this, but kind of like if Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, as you said, come out as like, I'm dyslexic, I'm autistic, it can destigmatize, I think.
Absolutely. And it is happening more and more. And actually on LinkedIn now, under the skills that you can choose that you've got, there's one called dyslexic thinking. Now, interestingly enough, I've noticed that when I have that on my skill set, I get fewer job offers than when I don't have it. And we're not there yet in terms of stigma. We're not there yet in terms of understanding. We will be, though, and there are certain industries that are actively recruiting people with autism, people with dyslexia. They are actively doing that because they know that's where the skill set, that's where the talent is for what they need. When I first got to the Brain charity, I didn't speak about it at all. In fact, I was a very inauthentic leader. The way that I spoke, the way that I dressed, everything about me was in order to fit in with that stereotypical CEO type role. And it was only when I got very comfortable in my own skin, when I got very confident, that I spoke to the board about being dyslexic. I still am reluctant to be entirely authentic at work because I don't think the world's ready for the real me yet. I think, some of my closest colleagues are completely fine with the real Nanette, but I think there are other people out there that aren't. And we were talking about dress code before the interview began. And I think there is a connection between neurodivergence and youth subculture, alternative ways of dressing. I think there is definitely a link between goth, punk, emo, all of those groups and neurodivergence. And I, for one, would have loved to have had a Mohican all of my life. But there was no way I would have been able to have become a deputy manager way back when if I'd have had a Mohican. So it went when I was in my mid-20s. It's not come back. Maybe one day when I'm in my 60s. I'll bring it back again. But that's the real me. I think, being an authentic leader is really, really important. And one day maybe we'll be able to do that. But at the moment, it's too risky. It's okay to be an authentic leader if you're neurotypical, white, straight, middle-class man. If you're not, you need to be careful. That's what I would say.
You mentioned on LinkedIn that you see you get more interaction or job offers if you, without having dyslexic thinking on there. What's your approach now? Do you think to yourself, well, this is my type of thinking. You're going to experience it if I get the job anyway. Because the thing is, like, if you get a job, right, and you're telling the employer, well, this is who I am, and it's not authentic, eventually you get the job, but you can only mask so much. So do you think to yourself, well, I'm going to put that, and it will weed out those companies that actually I wouldn't fit in at and wouldn't appreciate the actual thinking I'm going to bring to the organization? Or do you think, well, actually, because the challenge here is, and everyone's position is different, but some people, I need the work, I need the job. You can have ideals, right? But we need to earn money, or and work is so fundamental, I think, or what we're doing with our days to our mental health. And if you kind of have these high ideals, but the society's not there yet, and you can't eat, that's not useful either. So I wonder how you approach kind of being authentic now.
I usually tailor make my approach to whoever I think I'm going to be dealing with. So, that can range from, if it's a recruitment agency, my assumption is that they are going to be looking for people who fit this little box. If I'm dealing with another leader, I feel much more comfortable being myself, because the likelihood is that they're going to understand me and they're going to be like me. So I really tailor make it. What I really hope is that for your generation and the generations below you, that you won't have to do that anymore. And part of, that's the reason I'm talking to you now about this, is the reason the Brain Charity go out and teach about neurodiversity, is because it's wrong and it shouldn't be like that. It is like that still at the moment, though. And as much as I would love to tell you that I am, out, I am out sometimes. And if you research me online, you'll see that, I've done interviews like this several times, but sometimes I mask and I try to be like everybody else. And that's because I know doors will slam in my face sometimes. So there are times when I keep it a secret. And then other times when I'm very loud and shouty about it. Things, I would say it's 50-50 at the moment. Roughly 50% of the people I meet, I try and fit in with them or with the stereotype of being a CEO. And then the other amount of time, I'm much more relaxed about it. And I think instinctively when you meet somebody whether they're going to be open-minded or not, don't you?
Yeah. I wonder what the aspects of yourself you feel that you need to, or you do want to mask and kind of hold back in those situations are. So it can be kind of beyond the aesthetic of like a mohawk or kind of wearing whatever you want, like in terms of one's mind, like what do you feel that are ways that you are authentic to you that just people couldn't kind of, I can't think of the word, but accommodate?
I suppose that could be anything from not caring about the spelling in an email. So obviously, you've got spell checkers now, and they will pick up on spelling and grammar problems, but they won't pick up on all of them. So every time I send an email, I'll have it read back to me. So I'll get the computer to read it back to me, because I can hear the problem with it. I can't see it. So obviously that means that I'm working at a slower pace. If I'm in an environment where everybody knows I'm dyslexic, I don't have to worry about doing that. I can just fire it off. It doesn't matter if there's a few typos in it, and it doesn't. But there are people out there that will judge you on that. They will assume you're not as intelligent because you've got these spelling mistakes. So on one level, it could be something like that, which is a mask, really. And then on another level, it could be anything from, working really hard to, look the part and act the part. And I remember in a previous role where I had suggested that we didn't need minutes anymore from meetings. He said, look, we're recording these meetings. Why do we need minutes? This is ridiculous. We don't need minutes. And I think it was a perfectly reasonable suggestion, but it was probably a step too far for a lot of people, particularly people who are used to having things in a particular way and don't like change, And for me, I was very flippant about it. Let's get rid of meetings. But for a lot of people, they weren't ready for that. It was too much of a leap. And there was, it's kind of, I know that I love change. I love new things. I love moving forward. I'm very aware of being around people that aren't like that at all, though. And I need to take them into account, So in my mind, rip up the book, chuck it in the bin, start again. It's not a problem. Let's do things this way. We don't have to do things like that anymore. But I can't just go around being that way, because if I am, it's too much for some people. And so I'm masking that way as well. I don't move forward as fast as I would like. I do things at a slower pace to make sure that I bring people along with me.
I'm curious what you feel your strengths are that kind of allow you to obtain CEO type positions, leadership positions, effectively, because I feel I can't imagine being in that position. But that, I think, is in part because what I perceive a CEO to be and how to act, how they would act potentially, and I think to myself, but you could be a different type of CEO. I could be or a leader in my own way, and it's just that I haven't necessarily seen those examples of people that kind of where I have a kind of resonance with in positions. So I wonder, like, what strengths do you think that you have that have been appreciated enough by the kind of majority, or at least in those in positions to hire you?
Well, I guess, to start with, you get leaders in all sorts of different places. So you get somebody who's in charge of the local car garage. There'll be a boss there, and there'll be a boss in the off licence and a boss in the shop, and there'll be a boss of the taxi firm, and there'll be a boss of the care home. And then you've got bosses of multinational, huge global corporate organisations. You've got bosses all over the place. And some bosses are really, really clever, and some are. And some are really, really nice, kind and open-minded, and some are. But the thing I think that links them together is, number one, feeling comfortable with responsibility. I've met loads of people in my career who were much brighter than me, but just didn't want it, couldn't cope with it. It was too much pressure, particularly when you're talking about people's livelihoods and making sure you're earning enough money to be able to retain employees. That's a really big responsibility. And so number one is wanting the responsibility, having the confidence to take on that role, take on that responsibility. So that's one angle. Another, I think, if you are going to be a good leader, you have to be somebody who lives in the future all the time. And I'm one of those people. I'm not interested in history. I don't know why anyone would be. It's already happened. I'm not interested. I like thinking about the future and what that means in my everyday work is that I am constantly on the lookout for new opportunities and threats, because I'm always looking about what's coming next. And that's what they mean by strategic thinker, really. They mean somebody who thinks ahead and plans ahead. And if you're going to run a business, if you're going to be a boss, that's what you need to do. If you're running a shop, you need to think about, are people going to be buying T-shirts or cardigans next week? Do we need to get in some barbecue charcoal or some blankets? What's coming next? You always have to be thinking about that. And then there's that creative aspect, that problem-solving aspect that makes you resourceful and innovative. If you are an individual who can make something out of nothing, if you are somebody who can add 2 and 2 up and come up with 5, that is really going to give you the edge on your competitors and everybody around you. We at the Brain Charity, we saw the neurodiversity wave coming pretty early on, and we jumped on it and we were like, right, we're going to lead this, we're going to provide this training. You have to kind of see the opportunities and go for it. And even if you've got no resources, gather up what you can gather up, make what you can make. So I think the creativity, the future thinking, and feeling comfortable in that position are the 3 things that bind the boss at the garage with the boss of Apple together.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the extra time. I really appreciate it.